was one of those calm summer afternoons when everything seemed to slow down. The sun hung high in the sky, and the soft hum of cicadas blended with the sound of sprinklers spraying over the lawns. The neighborhood pool was quiet that day, almost too quiet. Most families were either inside escaping the heat or away for the weekend. Only a few kids' bicycles leaned against the fence, their bright colors fading under the sun. At the far end of the pool, a man sat on a lounge chair with a towel draped over his shoulders. He looked relaxed, the kind of calm that comes after a long week of hard work. He wasn't wearing anything fancy, just a pair of swim shorts, dark sunglasses, and a book in his hand. Every now and then he looked around, taking in the peaceful scene. The water shimmered under the sunlight, rippling softly with the breeze. This was his way of unwinding. For weeks his job had kept him busy, long hours, constant phone calls, and endless meetings. Today was supposed to be a break. He finally had a free afternoon to himself, and all he wanted was a quiet swim and some time to think. He'd bought a house in this neighborhood just a few months earlier. It was quiet, safe, and family-friendly. Exactly what he'd been looking for. He hadn't met too many of his neighbors yet. Everyone seemed polite but distant, offering quick smiles or short greetings. That didn't bother him much. He wasn't the type to go knocking on doors to make friends. He believed that people got to know you over time, through small gestures, not forced introductions. As he adjusted his chair and opened his book again, a woman entered the pool area. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat, big sunglasses, and carried a tote bag filled with magazines and sunscreen. From the moment she walked in, she moved like she owned the place, checking everything around her, glancing at the chairs, and making sure the pool gate closed behind her. She noticed the man sitting by the water. Her expression tightened slightly. She didn't recognize him, and that to her was reason enough to feel uneasy. She'd lived in this neighborhood for over 5 years and believed she knew everyone who belonged there. In her mind, that was part of what made the community safe. The man didn't notice her at first. He was lost in his book, only lifting his head when a shadow fell over the page. When he looked up, he saw her standing a few feet away. Her arms folded and her expression curious, but not the friendly kind of curious. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp and questioning. He smiled politely. "Hi there. How are you?" "I'm fine," she replied quickly. "I was just wondering, do you live here?" He blinked, slightly confused by the question. "Yes, I do." "Really?" she said, squinting as if trying to place him. "I've never seen you here before." He gave a small laugh. "I moved in a few months ago. Haven't had much free time until today." She tilted her head, clearly not satisfied with that answer. "Oh, well, this is a private pool. It's for residents only." "I know," he said calmly. "That's why I'm here. I'm a resident." Her expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked more suspicious. "Do you have your key card or your pool pass with you?" He looked at her for a moment, unsure whether she was serious. "I didn't think I needed to bring it while I was already inside," he said evenly. "I used it to come in." "Well," she said, her hands going to her hips, "some people sneak in here sometimes. We've had problems before." He nodded slightly, trying to stay polite. "I understand. But I live here. I'm not sneaking in." There was a short silence. The woman didn't seem convinced. She looked around the pool area, as if expecting someone else to back her up. But the place was empty except for the two of them. The man put his book down and stood up, hoping a calm conversation would clear things up. "If you want, I can show you my house key or my ID," he offered gently. "I'm not here to cause any trouble." But she waved her hand dismissively. "That won't prove anything. People can fake those things. We've had strangers come around pretending to live here before." He raised an eyebrow. "I see, and what makes you think I'm one of them?" She hesitated. "Well, I just haven't seen you before, that's all. And I take care of this neighborhood. I make sure everything's in order." He wanted to laugh, but he held it in. "I appreciate that," he said. "But I assure you I live here." The woman's tone grew a little sharper. "You can understand why I'd be cautious, right? This community works hard to keep things safe." He nodded. "Of course. Safety's important. But it's also important not to assume the worst about people." That made her pause, but only for a moment. "Well," she said, "if you really live here, then what street do you live on?" He sighed softly. "Maple Drive," she frowned, thinking. "Oh, that's the newer section. I don't really know those neighbors yet." "Exactly," he said with a small smile. That's why you haven't seen me before. Still, she wasn't ready to let it go. Do you know the HOA president's name? He chuckled quietly. Yes, I do. But do I really need to pass a quiz to sit by the pool? The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm just doing my duty as a responsible resident. Fair enough, he said, keeping his tone friendly. I respect that. He picked his book back up and sat down again, trying to return to his peaceful afternoon. But he could feel her eyes still on him. She stood there for a moment longer, tapping her foot before muttering, "We'll see about that." Then she turned and walked to the other side of the pool, pulling out her phone. He knew what that meant. He'd seen that look before, someone about to make a call because they couldn't imagine they might be wrong. He closed his book and sighed quietly. For the next few minutes, he watched the ripples on the water and tried to stay calm. He didn't want any scene, especially not here in his own neighborhood. He believed in patience. Over the years, his job had taught him that reacting too fast could turn a misunderstanding into something much worse. Still, he couldn't help but feel a familiar sting. No matter how polite he was, how well-spoken, how calm, there were always people ready to assume he didn't belong. Across the pool, the woman was still on her phone, talking in a low voice but occasionally glancing over at him. He could tell she was describing him, her free hand gesturing slightly as she spoke. He tried to ignore it. The last thing he wanted was to get angry or defensive. A few minutes later, she ended the call and walked back toward him. Her tone was smug now, like she was certain she had done the right thing. I just called the management office, she said. They're going to check if you're on the resident list. He nodded slowly. All right, he said simply. You don't mind waiting here until they confirm? She asked, crossing her arms. He looked at her for a moment. No problem, he said calmly. I'll wait. Inside, he was shaking his head. There were a dozen better ways she could have handled this. A simple, friendly conversation could have solved it. Instead, she had turned a peaceful afternoon into an uncomfortable standoff. He leaned back again and tried to focus on the sound of the water. He thought about how many times he had told people, both in his professional and personal life, that kindness could prevent unnecessary tension. Yet here he was, living through the exact kind of misunderstanding he always tried to stop. The minutes dragged by. The woman stood near the entrance, pacing slightly, checking her phone as if waiting for confirmation. Every now and then she shot him a quick glance. He wanted to tell her that he'd lived through worse, that this wasn't the first time someone had doubted his place in a space he rightfully belonged in. But he didn't. He'd learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. After what felt like forever, the woman received a message. She looked at her screen, frowned slightly, then turned toward him again. Management says they can't find your name on the list, she said. He looked surprised. That's strange, he said. I just renewed my resident card last month. Well, maybe you made a mistake, she said quickly. Or maybe you're not supposed to be here. He stood up again, slowly this time. Listen, he said gently, I don't want any trouble. I'm here to relax just like everyone else. I'm sure this can be sorted out, but she wasn't listening. She had already picked up her phone again. I think I'll just call security, she said firmly. He took a deep breath, nodding to himself. Go ahead, he said quietly. In that moment, he wasn't angry, just disappointed. Disappointed that something as simple as an afternoon swim could turn into this. He dedicated his whole career to helping people, protecting them and treating everyone fairly. Yet now, when he was off duty and simply being himself, he was being treated like an outsider. He sat back down, folded his hands together, and stared into the water. The sun had shifted slightly, casting long shadows over the deck. The laughter of a couple of kids echoed faintly from somewhere down the street. It was such a normal, peaceful world, and yet, moments like this showed how fragile that peace could be when someone's assumptions got in the way. After another few minutes, the woman put down her phone again. She looked satisfied, almost proud. Security will be here soon, she said. They'll handle this. He nodded once more, his voice steady. All right. She gave a curt nod and walked a few steps away, standing near the gate again, as if guarding it. The man closed his eyes for a moment, took a slow breath, and reminded himself of something his mentor once told him. Don't let other people's fear change your peace. He opened his eyes again and looked around. The sky was still blue, the water still sparkling, the air still filled with the quiet hum of summer. He wasn't going to let this ruin his day. He leaned back and waited. Somewhere deep down, he knew this wouldn't end the way she expected. What she didn't realize, and what would soon surprise her more than anything, was that the man she was questioning, the man she had just called security on, was not only a resident, but the head of the local police department. But that part of the story hadn't unfolded yet. For now, it was still a quiet afternoon by the pool, with a man just trying to enjoy a bit of peace and a woman convinced she was doing the right thing. Neither of them knew how big a moment this would become. One that would teach the whole neighborhood a quiet but powerful lesson about respect, patience, and the danger of assumptions. The air was warm. The water shimmered, and somewhere nearby, a lawnmower started up. It was an ordinary summer day, at least it had started that way. But sometimes it's on the most ordinary days that people reveal who they truly are. The sound of car tires crunching over the gravel broke the silence around the pool. The woman straightened up immediately, her expression brightening with relief as if her reinforcements had finally arrived. The man looked toward the gate, calm as ever, though inside he was quietly preparing himself for what would happen next. A white SUV marked with the neighborhood security logo pulled up. 2 security officers stepped out, both wearing light blue shirts and caps. One of them was tall and broad-shouldered, while the other seemed younger, almost nervous. They walked toward the pool entrance, pushing the gate open with a metallic click. "There they are," the woman said quickly, waving her hand in the air like someone who had just solved a big problem. "Over here." "That's him!" The man stayed seated, watching quietly as the 2 officers approached. The older officer spoke first, his tone polite but cautious. "Good afternoon, sir. We got a call about a possible trespassing situation." The man nodded slightly. "Yes, I'm aware. I'm the one she's talking about." The woman crossed her arms, standing behind the officers. "He says he lives here," she said firmly, "but I've never seen him before and he didn't show me his pool pass." The older officer gave her a quick nod before turning back to the man. "Do you have some kind of ID or key card with you, sir? Just to clear this up?" The man reached into his bag and pulled out his wallet. He handed over his resident access card and his driver's license. The officer looked at them, then at the woman, then back at the card again. "This looks valid," he said after a moment. "Your name and address match the records for Maple Drive." The woman frowned, confused. "That can't be right. The management said they couldn't find his name earlier." The officer nodded patiently. "Sometimes their online list isn't updated right away. It happens often when new residents move in or renew cards." The woman opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. She looked embarrassed for a moment, but her pride wouldn't let her back down just yet. "Well, I was only doing what's right," she said defensively. "You never know these days. People sneak into private pools all the time." The man spoke softly. "I understand wanting to protect your neighborhood. But maybe next time, start with a friendly hello before assuming someone doesn't belong." The older officer gave him a subtle nod, as if silently agreeing. The woman shifted uncomfortably, her face turning slightly red. "Well," she muttered, "I still think it's strange that I've never seen you before." The younger security officer, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "Ma'am, this gentleman is on the record. We don't see any issue here." But she wasn't ready to let it go. "Still," she said quickly, "he could be lying. People fake documents. I think the police should double-check this." The older officer sighed quietly. "That won't be necessary. Everything seems fine." But she had already pulled out her phone again. "No, I think it is necessary," she said. "We pay a lot to live here. I'm not taking chances." The man watched her, still calm. He could have stopped her right then and there, but he didn't. A part of him wanted to see how far she was willing to go. "All right," he said quietly. "If you think calling the police will make you feel safer, go ahead." She nodded as if she'd just been given permission. "I will," she said, dialing quickly. The officers exchanged awkward glances. The older one spoke softly to the man. "I'm sorry about this, sir. Some residents get a bit overzealous." "It's fine," the man said. "I've dealt with worse." The woman was pacing as she spoke into her phone. Her voice carried across the pool area. "Yes, there's a man at the community pool who refuses to leave. He says he lives here, but I don't believe him. Yes, I'm at the corner of Maple and Pine." The man looked down at the water, the sunlight reflecting off the ripples. He could already imagine how this would look when the patrol car arrived. A man sitting quietly by the pool while others assumed the worst. He had seen scenes like this before, too many times and not just in the news. He'd seen it in his own work, how fear could twist a simple misunderstanding into something much bigger. That's why he always stayed calm. After she hung up, the woman turned to the officers again. "The police are on their way," she said, satisfied. "All right," the older officer said carefully. "We'll wait until they arrive just to make sure everything stays calm." The woman nodded, standing proudly near the gate again. "Good," she said. "At least now this will be sorted properly." The man leaned back in his chair again, resting his hands on his lap. He had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. A few minutes passed. The air was heavy and still. The woman kept glancing at him, as if expecting him to suddenly admit he didn't belong. He didn't. He just sat there quietly, breathing slowly, eyes on the water. Finally, the faint sound of sirens reached their ears. The woman straightened instantly, her eyes lighting up. "Here they come," she said with relief. A marked police SUV pulled up by the pool gate. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. They looked professional but relaxed, as if this wasn't their first call of the day. The woman waved to them eagerly. "Officers, over here!" she called. They approached, and the older of the 2 spoke first. "Afternoon, ma'am. What seems to be the problem?" The woman launched into her story quickly, her words tumbling out. "There's a man here who doesn't belong. I don't recognize him, and he wouldn't show me any proper proof. I called security, but they said it's fine. I think it needs to be handled officially." The officers glanced at the man, who stood up slowly, calm as ever. "Sir," one of the officers said respectfully, "can we have your name, please?" The man smiled faintly. "You might already know it," he said. The officers looked at him closely. Then recognition flickered across their faces. The younger officer straightened immediately, and the older one gave a respectful nod. "Captain?" he said, almost startled. The woman blinked, confused. "Captain?" The man gave a small nod. "Yes," he said. "I'm Captain Roberts. I'm the department's division head. I also happen to live here." The woman's face went completely still. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The officers turned toward her, their expressions polite but awkward. The older officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "Captain Roberts is our commanding officer." The color drained from the woman's face. I didn't know," she stammered. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." The captain nodded slowly. "I understand," he said calmly. "But next time, maybe try asking before assuming." She looked mortified. Her hands fidgeted with her phone as if she wanted to disappear. I didn't mean any harm," she said quietly. "I just didn't recognize you." The captain smiled faintly. "That's all right. It happens. But sometimes, good intentions can still hurt when they're based on assumptions." The younger officer tried to ease the tension with a small chuckle. "Guess this is one for the books, huh?" The captain smiled again, though his eyes were thoughtful. "Yeah," he said softly. "It's a reminder." The woman nodded, barely looking up. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Really. I didn't mean to cause trouble." The captain nodded again. "I know. Just remember that people don't always look like what you expect. We all belong somewhere." She nodded quickly, still red-faced. "Of course. I understand." The officers gave the captain a respectful nod before turning to leave. The security team followed quietly behind, both looking like they wanted to disappear too. When they were gone, the pool area was silent again. The woman stood awkwardly by the gate, her eyes downcast. The captain sat back down in his chair, the same calm presence he'd been from the start. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry again." He looked at her and nodded. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "Just be kind next time." She nodded quickly and walked away, her steps hurried, her pride bruised but her lesson learned. The captain sat quietly for a while after that. The sun had dipped lower, painting the water with golden light. A light breeze stirred the air, carrying the sound of distant laughter from somewhere beyond the fence. He thought about how strange life could be. A simple day off had turned into an unexpected lesson for everyone involved. But he didn't feel angry. He felt reflective. He'd always believed that change starts in small moments, in the quiet choices people make when no one is watching. Maybe this was one of those moments. Maybe the next time that woman saw someone new at the pool, she'd remember this day and choose to greet them instead of doubt them. He picked up his book again, but he didn't open it. He just sat there watching the sunlight dance on the water. He thought about how often people misjudge one another, not because they're cruel, but because they're afraid of what they don't understand. He knew that fear well. He'd seen it in others and sometimes even felt it himself. But he also knew something stronger: patience. Patience had guided him through years of work, through hundreds of tough calls and tense moments. And it had guided him here today, too. He smiled quietly to himself. The world was still learning, and so was he. After a while, a couple of kids ran through the gate laughing as they jumped into the water. Their joy broke the heavy silence, and the pool felt alive again. The captain leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and let out a slow, peaceful breath. The day had started with calm, turned tense, and ended with quiet understanding. That was enough for him, because in the end, it wasn't about being right or wrong. It was about showing grace when others forgot it. And sometimes that quiet grace could change more than anger ever could. The woman didn't come back to the pool that day. But later that week, she left a small note at the captain's doorstep. It was short and simple. "I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. Thank you for being patient when I wasn't." He smiled when he read it, not because he wanted an apology, but because it meant she understood. And as he placed the note on his kitchen counter, he thought to himself that maybe this neighborhood was going to be just fine after all. The next few days in the neighborhood were quieter than usual. Word about what had happened at the pool spread faster than anyone expected. In small communities, stories had a way of traveling through whispers, passed between morning joggers, parents at the playground, or neighbors chatting by the mailboxes. Everyone seemed to have their own version of the story. Some said a man had been wrongly accused of trespassing. Others said a woman had embarrassed herself by calling security and the police on someone who actually lived there. But no matter how the details changed, one thing remained the same. People were talking about it. For the man, life went on almost the same as before. He still went to work, still smiled at neighbors, and still stopped by the coffee shop on the corner every morning. But something about the neighborhood felt different now. People who used to glance past him now offered awkward smiles or polite nods. A few even went out of their way to say hello, though their voices carried that nervous tone of someone who wasn't sure what to say. He didn't blame them. He knew most of them had heard the story, and he wasn't interested in embarrassing anyone further. The woman, on the other hand, kept to herself. For several days, she didn't leave her house except for short walks with her dog. When she saw him at a distance, she'd turn quickly or cross the street. She was embarrassed, deeply so, but also conflicted. She had built her sense of pride on being the kind of person who looked after the community. She'd been the first to volunteer for the neighborhood watch, the one who reminded others about safety rules and monthly meetings. But now she felt that everyone was quietly judging her, even if no one said it out loud. One evening, as the sun began to set, the man stood outside his home watering his plants. The air was warm, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Across the street, he saw the woman step out with her dog again. Their eyes met briefly. She froze for a second, then gave a small, uncertain wave. He smiled and waved back. That small gesture seemed to loosen something in the air. She hesitated, then slowly walked over, the dog tugging gently on the leash. "Good evening," she said softly. "Good evening," he replied. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of water hitting the soil filled the silence. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, "for how you handled everything that day." He turned off the hose and faced her. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "It's over." "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I do, because I was wrong. And I can't stop thinking about it. I thought I was doing the right thing, but—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at her dog. "I guess I wasn't." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes good intentions come out the wrong way," he said. "What matters is that we learn from them." She looked up again, her eyes a little misty. "I really am sorry," she said quietly. "You didn't deserve that." He smiled kindly. "Thank you. That means a lot." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, then why didn't you tell me who you were that day?" "You could have stopped everything right away." He chuckled softly. "If I'd done that, you might not have learned the lesson the same way." She blinked. "Lesson?" He nodded. Sometimes people need to see the whole picture before they understand how things look from the other side. If I'd said it right away, maybe it would have felt like I was trying to show power. But it wasn't about that. She nodded slowly, understanding. You were teaching through patience, he shrugged lightly. Something like that. There was a moment of silence. The dog barked softly, breaking the tension. Well, she said, taking a small step back. Thank you for giving me the chance to apologize. You're welcome, he said. And thank you for coming over. That takes courage, she smiled faintly, a genuine one this time. I'm trying to do better, she said. I believe you, he replied. As she walked away, he watched her go, feeling a quiet sense of peace. Maybe the whole thing had been worth it after all, if it meant people were starting to think differently. Over the next week, something interesting began to happen. A few of the neighbors started reaching out more. One afternoon, a man from down the street waved him over and said, Hey, we're having a cookout on Saturday. You should come. It was the first time anyone had invited him to something since he moved in. He smiled and said he'd be there. When Saturday arrived, the air was filled with the smell of grilled burgers and laughter. Kids ran around the yard, chasing each other with water balloons while adults chatted in small groups. The man arrived quietly, bringing a bowl of fruit salad as his contribution. The moment he stepped in, people greeted him warmly. A few thanked him for how calmly he had handled the pool incident. One woman said, You showed a lot of grace that day. I don't think I could have done that, he smiled humbly. It was just a misunderstanding, he said. No hard feelings. The woman who had confronted him was there too. She stayed near the drinks table at first, keeping a respectful distance. But as the evening went on, she slowly joined the conversations. People didn't avoid her, and that seemed to ease her nerves. Eventually, she walked over to him again, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. I thought you might like one, she said. He accepted it with a smile. Thank you. They stood together quietly, watching the kids play. The golden light of the setting sun made everything look softer, calmer. You know, she said after a moment. I've been thinking about something. When I called security that day, I thought I was protecting my home. But now I realize I wasn't protecting anyone. I was just reacting to my own fears. He nodded slowly. Fear makes people do that sometimes, he said. But awareness fixes it. She smiled a little. You sound like a teacher, he chuckled. In my line of work, sometimes I am. She looked curious. Is it hard? Being responsible for people's safety every day? He thought about it for a moment. It can be, he said honestly. But it's worth it. Because helping people even when they don't realize they need it, that's the part that makes it meaningful. She looked at him thoughtfully. I think you helped me too, she said softly. He gave her a kind smile. Maybe we helped each other. A comfortable silence settled between them. The sounds of laughter and conversation floated through the air. Later that evening, as the party wound down and people began packing up, several neighbors came over to thank him again. One man clapped him on the back and said, You really set an example, you know that? Everyone's been talking about it, he smiled modestly. I'm just glad it's turning into something good. And it had. The incident that could have divided the neighborhood had instead brought people together. The Homeowners Association even sent out a message later that week, reminding everyone about community values, kindness, respect, and understanding. But they also added a small note about bias and assumptions, urging residents to get to know each other before jumping to conclusions. It was a simple message, but it carried weight. The man read it and smiled. Change didn't always come through big speeches or arguments. Sometimes it came through quiet moments and uncomfortable lessons. Over time, the neighborhood began to feel different. People waved more often, stopped to chat, and even organized more gatherings. The pool, once the scene of tension, became a place of laughter and connection again. The woman returned too. The first time she went back, she looked nervous, unsure of how people would react. But when she arrived, a few neighbors smiled at her and said hello. That small kindness helped her relax, and when she saw the man already there, sitting by the water again, she smiled genuinely this time. He nodded in return, and everything felt normal, peaceful. She even brought extra lemonade that day and offered him some again. They talked casually about the weather, their jobs, and the neighborhood. It wasn't awkward anymore. Through those conversations, she learned more about who he really was. Not just his title or his position, but the kind of person he was. And with every talk, her respect for him grew. He never once brought up the incident again, and she never forgot how graciously he had handled it. Months passed, and the story slowly faded into the background. But for those who had witnessed it, the memory lingered as a quiet reminder, a reminder of how quickly people can judge, and how easily they can be wrong. The man continued his routine: work, morning walks, weekend swims. He'd become a familiar, trusted figure in the neighborhood. People waved to him warmly now, not out of guilt, but out of genuine friendliness. One afternoon, the Homeowners Association invited him to speak at a community meeting about safety and unity. He agreed, though he didn't prepare a speech. When the evening came, he stood before the small crowd gathered in the clubhouse. "I'm not here to talk about rules or enforcement," he said, his voice steady and kind. "I just want to talk about what it means to be a neighbor. It's easy to be cautious. It's harder to be compassionate. But real safety, real community, comes from knowing each other, not fearing each other." The room was quiet. People listened closely, nodding. He continued, "We all make mistakes. What matters is how we grow from them, and if one uncomfortable moment can make us better people, then maybe it was worth it." When he finished, the room filled with soft applause. The woman who had once confronted him was sitting in the back. She clapped too, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. Afterward, several people came up to shake his hand, thanking him for his words. The woman approached last. She didn't say much, just smiled and said, "Thank you." He smiled back. "You're welcome." That night, as he walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, he thought about how life had a funny way of teaching people. Sometimes the hardest moments turned into the most valuable lessons, not just for one person, but for everyone around them. And as he reached his front door, he looked up at the sky, calm and endless above him, and felt a quiet sense of peace because in the end, it wasn't just about being right or wrong, it was about what people chose to do afterward. And this time, everyone in that small neighborhood had chosen to do better. The weeks rolled by, and life in the neighborhood found a new rhythm. The pool was once again filled with laughter, the soft splashes of kids and the calm chatter of parents enjoying the sun. The tension that had once hung over that space was gone, replaced by a sense of ease that everyone could feel. For the man, it was nice to see things returning to normal. He loved watching the community grow closer, even if it had come from such an awkward beginning. Every day on his way home, he would see more people out for walks, neighbors talking across fences or families grilling dinner in their yards. He'd lived in many places before, but something about this neighborhood now felt special. Maybe it was because people had learned something important, something that went deeper than just politeness. One afternoon, as he walked toward the pool for his usual swim, he noticed a few familiar faces sitting around the deck. The woman was there too. She gave him a warm smile when she saw him. It was the kind of smile that carried both apology and friendship. "Good to see you," she said. "Good to see you too," he replied, placing his towel on a chair. She had brought a tray of cold lemonade again. "Would you like some?" she asked. He laughed softly. "You've made that a tradition now." "Well," she said with a small grin, "it's the least I can do." They both sat down under the shade of an umbrella. The sun danced over the surface of the pool, and the sound of children laughing nearby made the whole place feel alive. After a moment of silence, she said, "You know, I've been thinking about that day a lot." He nodded, taking a sip of his drink. "I'm sure it wasn't easy to go through," she sighed. "It wasn't. Not because of what happened, but because of what it showed me about myself. I always thought I was fair. I thought I treated everyone equally. But that day I realized I had biases I didn't even know about." He looked at her kindly. "Realizing that is the first step to changing it." She nodded. "I know, and I've been trying. I even joined a community group about inclusivity. They talk about how easy it is to make judgments without realizing it." He smiled. "That's a good thing. Most people never even take the time to think about it." She looked out at the water, her voice soft. "It's funny how one small moment can change everything. I mean, if that day hadn't happened, I probably would have gone on thinking I was always right." He chuckled gently. "Life has a way of humbling us at the right time." She smiled, nodding. "You're right about that. As the afternoon went on, more neighbors joined them. The man noticed how friendly everyone seemed now. Even people who had never talked before were mingling, laughing, and sharing snacks. It was as if the neighborhood had discovered what it meant to truly live together. Later that evening, as the sun dipped lower and the sky turned gold, one of the residents approached the man with a friendly grin. "Hey, we're planning a community cleanup next weekend. You should join us, I'll be there," the man said, smiling. When the day came, nearly everyone showed up. There were kids with trash bags, parents trimming bushes, and others painting the fences near the entrance. The woman brought her famous lemonade again, along with sandwiches. The man worked quietly beside an older neighbor, trimming weeds along the sidewalk. Every now and then, people would stop to chat with him. He noticed how the conversations had changed. They weren't stiff or distant anymore. They were genuine. When the work was done, they all gathered under a big tree for lunch. Someone brought out a speaker and soft music filled the air. The woman sat nearby, laughing with a group of parents. At one point, she turned to the man and said, "I was nervous about coming today. I thought people might still be judging me for what happened." He smiled. "You showed up. That's what matters. Everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone tries to fix them." She nodded slowly, taking in his words. "You know," she said, "that day by the pool, it could have gone so differently. You could have yelled or been angry, but you didn't. You stayed calm." He looked thoughtful for a moment. Anger never changes hearts, but patience sometimes does. She looked at him with quiet admiration. "You really do see things differently, don't you?" He smiled gently. "Maybe, but I've learned that peace takes practice. It's not something that just happens. It's something you build." That evening, as everyone packed up and headed home, a small group of neighbors gathered near the park entrance. Someone mentioned how nice it felt to finally have a real sense of community. Another suggested hosting monthly gatherings so that everyone could stay connected. The man listened with a smile, happy to see people taking initiative. He didn't need to lead or give instructions. Just being part of it was enough. As he walked home, the woman caught up to him. "You know," she said, "you've changed this place more than you realize." He chuckled. "I think we all did," she nodded. "Still, it started with you staying calm that day. If you had reacted differently, everything might have fallen apart." He thought for a moment, then said, "Sometimes the quietest response can make the loudest change." She smiled. "You should write that down somewhere." He laughed softly. "Maybe someday." A few days later, the Homeowners Association asked if he'd be willing to speak again, this time at a community event focused on kindness and awareness. He agreed. When the day came, the clubhouse was full. Families, children, and elderly neighbors all sat together, chatting before it started. The woman sat near the front this time, nodding encouragingly when he stepped up to speak. He didn't use a microphone. He didn't need one. His voice was calm, steady, and clear. "Most of us move into neighborhoods hoping for safety and peace," he began. "But real safety doesn't just come from gates or rules. It comes from trust, the kind that's built when people see and respect one another." The room was quiet, everyone listening closely. He continued, "We all make assumptions sometimes. We all have moments where we judge without meaning to. What matters is what we do after that. Do we learn? Do we grow? Or do we stay the same?" He looked around the room, his expression warm. "We're all neighbors here. Different stories, different backgrounds, but we share the same streets, the same parks, the same skies. That's what community really means." When he finished, the room filled with applause. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was heartfelt. The kind that said people weren't just clapping for his words, but for what they stood for. Afterward, many people came up to thank him. Some even shared their own small experiences, times when they'd misjudged someone or learned something important about kindness. The woman approached last, as always. She smiled softly. "You're a good man," she said. He smiled back. "I'm just trying to do right by people." "That's exactly what makes you good," she replied. They both laughed quietly. As the evening faded, a soft breeze moved through the open doors of the clubhouse. Outside, the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. Kids played tag in the yard while parents chatted nearby. It felt peaceful, alive, and connected. Weeks later, the homeowners board sent out another community message. This one was different. It wasn't about rules or reminders. It was about unity. The message read, "A neighborhood is not just a collection of houses. It's a collection of hearts. Let's keep ours open." When the man read it, he smiled. The next day, he stopped by the pool again. The woman was there too, sitting with a book this time. She waved. "Back to where it all began," she said with a small laugh. He nodded, settling into his chair. "Seems like it." For a moment, they both looked out at the calm water. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, and the smell of sunscreen in summer filled the air. "It feels different now," she said quietly. He nodded. "Because it is. People change. Places change. That's what makes life interesting." She smiled. "You were right. It's not about being cautious, it's about being kind." He looked over at her and returned the smile. "Exactly." The sun slowly dipped behind the houses, casting long shadows across the pool deck. The neighborhood lights flickered on one by one. Everything felt still, peaceful and right. They sat there quietly, sipping lemonade, not needing to say much more. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable. The kind of silence that spoke of understanding. And as the first stars began to appear in the sky, she said softly, "Thank you for not giving up on me that day." He looked at her, his eyes kind. "That's what neighbors are for," she smiled. And for the first time since that summer afternoon when everything had gone wrong, she felt completely at peace. The man leaned back, watching the reflections of the stars in the still water, and thought to himself how strange and beautiful life could be. One misunderstanding had brought about so much change, not through anger, but through patience, grace, and forgiveness. In the end, it wasn't just about one pool or one argument. It was about learning that people can grow, that communities can heal, and that sometimes the smallest acts of patience can leave the deepest impact. That summer evening ended quietly, but the message of it would stay in the hearts of everyone who lived there. The morning sun rose softly over the quiet neighborhood, painting everything in shades of gold. The air was warm and calm, and birds were singing on the fences as people prepared for the day. It was a peaceful scene, one that carried no signs of the tension that had once lived here. The man sat by his window, sipping his coffee and watching as a group of kids rode their bikes past his driveway. He smiled. It was hard to believe how much had changed in just a few months. There was laughter now where there had once been silence, conversations where there had once been distance. He had always believed that people could change if given the chance, but seeing it happen right in front of him felt like something special. After breakfast, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It had become part of his routine, something he looked forward to. As he walked, he greeted people by name. The mail carrier waved. A couple working on their garden smiled and offered him a drink of water. Children playing with chalk on the sidewalk ran up to show him their colorful drawings. When he reached the park near the pool, he noticed a few neighbors setting up tables and decorations. There were balloons, banners, and trays of food being arranged. One of the residents waved him over. "You made it just in time," she said cheerfully. "We're setting up for the Neighborhood Appreciation Day." "Didn't you get the message?" He smiled. "I must have missed that one." "Well, it's a thank you event for everyone who helped make this community stronger," she explained. "And you, my friend, are part of the reason it's happening." He tried to protest, but she waved him off. "Don't even start. Just be here. That's all we ask," he laughed. "All right, I'll stay." As more people arrived, the park slowly filled with music, laughter, and chatter. Children ran around with balloons while adults carried plates of food. The woman who had once caused so much tension arrived a bit later, carrying a large cake. When she saw the man, she smiled shyly. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he replied. "That looks good," she laughed. "I hope so. I spent all night baking it. It's for everyone. But I thought I'd start by offering you the first slice," he chuckled. "That's very kind of you." "It's the least I can do," she said. They placed the cake on the table, and soon people gathered around to admire it. Someone clapped their hands to get everyone's attention. "Before we start eating," said a cheerful voice from the crowd, "we'd like to take a moment to thank someone very special in our community." The man froze slightly, already guessing what was coming. Someone who taught us all a valuable lesson about patience, respect, and understanding. Someone who showed us that calmness can turn conflict into compassion. The crowd clapped, and the speaker gestured toward the man. He shook his head lightly, embarrassed but smiling. "You don't have to do that," he said, laughing, but the people clapped louder, Someone from the back shouted, "Speech, speech!" He sighed, smiling at their enthusiasm, and finally stepped forward. "Thank you," he said simply, holding up his hands. "I really appreciate this. But honestly, this isn't about me, it's about all of us. Because what happened here could have gone wrong in so many ways, but it didn't. It turned into something good, and that's because everyone decided to listen, to change, and to care." There was quiet for a moment as people nodded. He went on, his tone warm and steady. "I think we all learned that kindness isn't just about being nice when things are easy. It's about how we act when things are uncomfortable, when we feel uncertain or afraid. That's when kindness matters most." He paused and smiled. This neighborhood became better not because of one person, but because everyone decided to grow together. That's something worth celebrating. The crowd clapped again, this time softer but more heartfelt. After the small speech, the atmosphere grew even warmer. People chatted easily, shared food, and took pictures together. The man and the woman sat down under a tree with plates of cake and lemonade. "It feels good, doesn't it?" she said, looking around. "It does," he said. "Feels like home," she smiled. "It didn't always feel like that for me, but now it does. I think it's because we stopped being strangers." He nodded. "That's what community really means, seeing each other as people, not just faces." A small child ran up then, holding a balloon. "Can you help me tie this?" the boy asked the man. He smiled and knelt down to tie the string. "There you go. Now hold it tight." The boy grinned and ran off again. The woman watched and said softly, "You have a calm way with people." "It's rare," he shrugged. "I guess I've learned that calmness gives others room to breathe. When people feel safe, they open up." She nodded slowly. "I think that's what you gave all of us, a sense of safety." The day stretched on, filled with laughter and the smell of barbecue. The sound of a small band playing nearby added to the cheerful atmosphere. By evening, the golden light made everything glow. When it was time to clean up, everyone pitched in. Kids gathered trash, adults folded tables, and a few neighbors carried leftover food to share with others. Nobody had to ask for help, it just happened naturally. Before leaving, the woman turned to the man again. "You know, I used to see this place as just somewhere to live, but now it feels like a real community." He smiled. "That's because people like you helped make it that way." She looked touched. "Thank you. That means a lot." A week later, she stopped by his house with a small box in her hands. "I made this for you," she said. He opened it carefully. Inside was a small wooden plaque with a simple message engraved on it: "Patience builds peace." He looked up, clearly moved. "This is beautiful," he said softly. "I thought it fit," she said with a smile. "You taught me that lesson without even trying," he chuckled. "I'm glad something good came from it." "It came from both of us," she said. "From learning, forgiving, and moving forward." They talked for a while on the porch, sharing light conversation about work, the weather, and neighborhood events. It wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like old friends talking. That weekend, the community held another gathering, this time a movie night by the pool. Families brought blankets and popcorn. A large white screen was set up, and as the sun went down, the movie began to play. The man sat near the back, content just to watch the laughter and joy around him. The woman sat beside her husband this time, both relaxed and smiling. Halfway through the movie, a little girl came over and offered the man a handful of popcorn. "You want some?" she asked sweetly. He smiled and took a small bit. "Thank you." Her mother, sitting nearby, leaned over. "She talks about you all the time," she said with a laugh. "Says you're the nice man who always smiles." He laughed softly. "That's a good reputation to have." As the night went on, he looked up at the sky. The stars shimmered above, reflected in the still surface of the pool. The faint sound of laughter carried through the warm air. It was one of those rare, perfect moments when everything felt right. When the movie ended, people clapped and began packing up. A few came over to thank him again, not for any specific reason, but just because they wanted to. "Thanks for being part of this," someone said. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied with a smile. On his way home, he passed by the pool again and paused for a moment. The water was calm, glowing softly under the pool lights. He could still remember that first day clearly. The confusion, the confrontation, the misunderstanding. It felt like a lifetime ago. He thought about how quickly people can judge each other, how fast assumptions can turn into conflict. But he also thought about how quickly people can change when they're given a chance to understand. As he stood there, the woman walked by, carrying folded blankets. She smiled when she saw him. "Still thinking about everything?" she asked. He nodded. "Just remembering how far we've come." She looked out at the pool, too. "It's strange, isn't it? That something that started with anger ended with friendship." He smiled. "That's life. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the best lessons." She nodded. "I'll never forget it." They said goodnight and she walked home. He stayed for a little while longer, listening to the quiet night sounds. The crickets chirped. The soft hum of a streetlight buzzed in the background. It was peaceful. He took one last look at the water before turning to leave. The reflection of the stars rippled gently across the surface, reminding him that even when life seems still, it's always moving, always changing. The next morning, he woke up early and took a deep breath of fresh air. It was another sunny day and the world felt full of promise. He smiled, grabbed his towel, and headed to the pool, not out of routine but out of gratitude. When he arrived, a few early risers were already there. They greeted him warmly with waves and smiles. Someone handed him a cup of coffee. "Morning," they said cheerfully. "Morning," he replied, smiling. He sat down in his favorite chair, watching as the sunlight touched the water, turning it into a sheet of gold. He felt thankful, not just for the peace around him, but for the journey it took to get here. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from books or speeches. They come from small moments of grace, from choosing to stay calm when it's easier to be angry, from listening when it's easier to walk away. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the warmth of the morning sun wash over him. The pool that had once been the center of conflict was now a symbol of peace. The woman who had once judged him now called him a friend. And the neighborhood that had once been divided now stood united. It wasn't a perfect place, no place ever is, but it was better, kinder, wiser. As he listened to the sound of gentle waves lapping against the edge of the pool, he smiled quietly. He knew life would bring new challenges, new misunderstandings, maybe even new conflicts, but he also knew that kindness had power, that patience had strength, that understanding had healing, and that, in the end, would always make a difference. The morning light grew brighter, the sounds of laughter returned, and life carried on, peacefully, beautifully, and full of hope.